mission, vision, and strategic plan. I have some comments before as the team comes up to prepare to present this workshop. Our current strategic plan is set to sunset in summer of 2021. Board members have shared feedback around the possibility of revisiting certain aspects of our district's mission and vision prior to beginning the development of our next strategic plan, particularly as it relates to equity. Based on previous board comments, district staff have been developing a timeline to address the board's desire to possibly refresh our mission and vision statements while simultaneously providing a deeper dive into the concept of equity. Engaging in the activities now will ensure the district has a strong foundation on which to build our next strategic plan. I appreciate the school board's continued commitment to this work, and today's workshop will give board members a clearer picture of the timeline we are working with. Before we begin the workshop, I do want to emphasize that we need the board's direction on how to best proceed with these planning efforts. This includes selecting a date in early December for a board retreat. As I mentioned at a previous board meeting, and particularly as it relates to equity, this cannot be a one and done kind of deal. Equity work cannot and should not be the responsibility of one department or a division. It can't be owned by just one person either. It is going to take all of us working together, from the school sites to the district office and to the school board, to build a strategic plan that places equity at the center of everything that we do. It will require everyone's time and effort. So please keep in mind as you listen to this presentation today. And with that, I will turn it over to staff. Thank you.
So we just need to make sure the presentation gets loaded.
And while we're waiting on that, good afternoon, Board Chair, Mr. Barbieri, board members, and Superintendent Dr. Fenoy. There we go. All right. So before we engage in this workshop, I would like to give an opportunity for the members of our team to introduce themselves.
Hello again. I'm Kathy Villavicencio, Manager of Special Projects in the Chief of Staff's office.
Good afternoon. My name is Keisha Starks, Manager of Equity and Access.
And as you can see, we have some goals here that are outlined that we would like to accomplish by the conclusion of this workshop. But I think I would like to highlight and reference, as Dr. Fenoy stated, we definitely need your input, so keep that in mind as we share this information with you. At the conclusion of this workshop, it is our goal to share with you some short-term goals, some long-term goals, and give you a high-level view of the timeline of events and possible additional workshops that we could include. We'll also take a walk and look back and a quick review of our current equity policy, as well as share with you a recommendation that has now become a reality that is helping us in the school district of Palm Beach, all of our employees, to help them fine-tune their equity lens.
All right, so the board has discussed in several prior meetings the need to perhaps refresh our mission and vision and really come to a collective understanding of what we mean by equity before we dive into the development of our next strategic plan. So we're on track to kick that off in January of 2021. So November and December are really going to be a time crunch as it relates to putting a plan forward for the board to build and come to their own understanding of equity and perhaps some initial edits to the mission and vision, and then coming together as a collective to discuss those initial thoughts and reflections. And then, in the longer term, as Ms. Millen said, really operationalizing what that means in our next strategic plan and beyond. So again, we really just want to be very transparent that, again, as Dr. Fenoy said, this isn't a one and done. There are some things that we kind of need to lay the foundation for immediately in our short-term goals. And then again, making sure that we're still attending to the work that needs to happen. And so building out that schedule now so that we can make sure after y'all engage in that mission and vision refresh, that equity working definition, that we actually attend to all that and operationalize it in the long term. So why do this work now? Again, we kind of know that equity can mean different things to different people. The district has done a lot in terms of equity, which Ms. Millen and Ms. Starks will talk about a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. So we still want to respect and build on the work that we've done, But we also want to make sure that we're well-positioned to start our next strategic plan. And so again, really taking November and December to engage the board in some meaningful conversations about equity, as well as whether or not we need to change our mission and vision as we embark on our next strategic plan. So again, we've identified that there are some inequities within our current system, despite some of the work that we've already done. And so really the goal here is to close that, I don't want to say gap, because I'm very mindful of what Dr. Robinson said before, but repay that educational debt to all the children so that, they're all achieving at those high levels and those long-term outcomes that will be in our next strategic plan. So as part of this process, Dr. Fenoy, tasked staff to really put together a comprehensive plan. And so again, really want to be explicit and transparent with the board about what we can do right now. And so again, the most immediate efforts will be focused on unpacking equity and how they relate, to our education system. And again, all this work will precede and guide district staff as we embark on, the next strategic plan development, which again, will kick off in January of 2021 with the hope that we'll have an approved plan sometime in the summer, and then we can make sure that our focus shifts to implementation of that plan in an effective manner. And then again, the long-term goals. So we have heard everything the board has said in terms of, bringing in outside experts, leveraging our relationships with the Council of Great City Schools and other other associations and affiliations that y'all have, to just surface those best practices and see if there's anything that we could apply here in the local Palm Beach County context. So that involves, inviting guest speakers and scheduling regular listening sessions with our actual stakeholders. So, not tokenizing them, but inviting parents and students in to tell us, how do the policies that y'all approve here in this boardroom actually play out at the school centers? Having equity data chats. We know we've had a couple of those before, but not talking in averages. Having those courageous conversations where we're actually breaking out data into different subgroups and seeing how the achievement actually looks for those different subgroups. And then again, involving our community partners in these conversations as well, because it takes everyone. As Dr. Fenoy said, this is a focus not only for our school board, for our district, but we heard about the Hispanic Education Coalition and others, folks that come here to speak regularly to talk about equity, so making sure that we're engaging with them. And then also we have bright spots here in the community. Again, we'll hear about them a little bit more in this presentation, but how are we leveraging those? How are we learning from those best practices to then implement district-wide? So we'll also be inviting some folks to come share as part of our long-term goals. So here is one of the big asks in the presentation. Between now and November 30th, we're really hoping that the board is willing to engage in a self-study, which shouldn't take more than a handful of hours to watch a short webinar, read a short article, and reflect on some questions as they relate to equity and a possible mission vision refresh. And really, what do you as the school board envision equity to look like here in Palm Beach County? And so those would be followed up with a one-on-one debrief conversation with Mary Fertakis, who I'm very excited to speak to you about. She is an equity consultant with the National School Boards Association. We received some external funding to engage with her. She's a former school board member, a current Board of Education member in the state of Washington, and she's very invested in this work, and I'm extremely excited that she'll be able to guide the school board in some of these conversations, because we recognize these are sensitive topics for leaders. You have her resume and her bio. I know Mr. Tierney also emailed that to you earlier today, along with a copy of this plan. But if this is something the board agrees to, we'll share those resources electronically so y'all can start reflecting on these topics. We're hoping to schedule a board retreat, hopefully in early December. Ms. Fertakis is holding December 2nd from 1 to 4 p.m. right now, but we're definitely going to work with Ms. Bass and the rest of the board office to make sure that the timing works out. But hoping to have a few hours to really engage, like, this is, heavy stuff, and we want to make sure that the board has the time and space needed to engage in these conversations so that on December 9th, we can have this public meeting on the mission and vision and the strategic plan and kind of bring forth some drafts for the board to discuss as a collective. So again, the larger timeline is in one of the handouts you received, and I know we asked Ms. Fertakis to join us via Google Meet, so I'm not sure if she's here, but I also see the board chair has a comment.
I saw Ms. Brill wants to ask you a question.
Thank you, and I just don't want to let this go by because you mentioned the date of December 2nd, and for those of us participating, that's the Florida School Board Association. So Wednesday, Thursday, and I don't know if part of Friday are going, for those of us that have registered, we will not be available, so you're going to want to maybe rethink that date.
No, but the fact that we're entertaining a date, that's great. It's exciting. So we will definitely take that into account. Thank you, Ms. Brill. And then I don't know if Ms. Fertakis is on the line in the Google Meet. That's why you see me kind of texting down here at the same time.
I'm here.
Hi, Mary. Did you want to say a couple words to the school board?
Well, I'm not sure if they can see me or not, but I can see all of you, and I'm just very excited to work with all of you. I want to give all of you kudos for undertaking this critical work at this point in time, and just the planning that's going into it by your staff is really commendable, and I'm looking forward to being able to work with you to make this a reality for you.
Thank you. We're looking forward to you working with us on this also. Thank you.
All right. So like I said, a more detailed timeline is in your packet, but again, we will work with the board clerk to secure some dates for that board retreat, but also just surfacing that this month we'll hope you'll engage in that self-equity study, and I will work with the board office and Ms. Fertakis to find the best time to do those one-on-one debrief conversations. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Millen, who is going to walk us through some of the equity work that the district has done that we are hoping to build on in the next few months.
And real quickly, before Ms. Ms. Miller speaks to the board, I've taken the self-study and read those articles, so in our one-on-ones, I'll be more than willing to have those conversations with you as well.
As you know, approximately, I would say 3 years ago, it was Dr. Ruiz, Brian Knowles, several different departments, different employees across our district, all came together when they received the charge of creating an equity policy for our school district. And in that process, not only did they collaborate across different departments before they brought the policy to you, but they also met with several different community stakeholder groups, one being the District Diversity and Equity Committee, in which you recommend community organizations to serve on that committee. They received lots of feedback prior to bringing the policy to you for final approval. So now, fast forward again, another year, 2 years ago, we now have our district policy. In that policy, it outlines and clearly states our responsibility for the compliance to the 3 statutes that you see there for our state, but it also outlines a clear purpose for the policy, as well as some of the desired outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Speaking specifically, it doesn't just clearly state the purpose, it also outlines equity as an action as well as an outcome. Now, we receive feedback around that, and that can be fleshed out a little more. However, it's pretty clear in the policy itself that you approve that gives us clear outcomes that we should be shooting for all of our students. And speaking of those outcomes, the next 2 slides that you're going to see, we actually pulled the outcomes directly from the policy. And I want you to envision this, and it probably is easy for you to envision because some of you made these recommendations. We heard you loud and clear. Taking these desired outcomes, and imagine us creating mini equity workshops, hence equity deep dive, but also taking your advice and including experts. So imagine the different departments that are engaging in this work, as was stated before, actually getting us to describe what our current state is, being fully transparent on where we are. If these are our desired outcomes, just imagine having part of the workshop where we talk about the work. who's actually doing the work, what is our current state, how is it impacting our students, how close are we to our desired outcomes. And then, as you all have stated, and I think Mrs. Andrews said it in our last board workshop or special meeting, and some of you have said it as well, speaking to people that are in this journey, in this work, that have already done some of these things, finding out some of their pitfalls, finding out some of their successes, and drawing from that. And then the third piece would be creating a roadmap to get to that desired outcome. So we take what we're currently doing, get a current state, we learn from best practices from those that are doing the work, we bring them as a part of that workshop, and then we actually start mapping out how are we going to get, or determining where we are to get to that desired outcome for all of our students. Because this has, and this is the second set of outcomes, because this has been already outlined in our equity policy, we thought it'd be a great place to start, because it clearly, a lot of these desired outcomes are in small boxes, but they take a lot of work. So we have a lot of work to do, but we've done some good work already here in the school district. And just imagine taking all of that and thinking about what is it that we want at the end of this equity journey for all of our students once they get to the point they're graduating and they get to that state. Like, how do we put all this together to ensure that all of this is working for the good of what we have in mind for our students? It also outlines, it's a great opportunity for us to develop a foundational base for this equity journey that we are continuing to embark on, and it creates an opportunity of use of common language and common understanding. So just taking all these desired outcomes, think about it from that perspective, and we're proposing that these could be the topics or focus around our equity future deep dives in our future workshops, because we have all committed to making sure this is an ongoing process. And speaking of the District Diversity and Equity Committee, not only did they provide input on the policy in which that was approved, they also continue to meet. We meet every month continuously. And pulling out these desired outcomes from the policy is what we do as a portion of our meeting. And we actually monitor, and we're getting to where are we in our current state, how are we going to get to our desired state, and they are then making recommendations, of course, to the board. Well, guess what? They have committed to continue doing that, and also would like to also provide input on future workshops of this sort. And when we're speaking to this, our whole goal is to make all of this a reality for our students. So speaking of reality, we've been engaging in workshops here in our district with Racial Equity Institute. We've been doing that for several years now, and several of you have attended their workshops as well. Well, that was one part of the work, but what was it that we needed to create in-house for sustainability so that all of our employees could participate in ongoing conversations around that? Well, I want you to go back now. First, I took you back 3 years with talking about the policy, took you back 2 years, the approval of the policy. Go back at like 4 or 5 years. And if everyone on the dais remembers, there was a equity audit that was completed. Yeah, I see you shaking your heads. Yes, it was an equity audit completed. And one of the recommendations of that audit was that our district needed to engage in more culturally responsive education, ongoing for everyone in the district. It was a recommendation. Well, I'm proud to announce that that recommendation is now a reality, and I would like to turn it over to Ms. Starks, who is going to take us through where we currently are with this one piece that was a recommendation, but now employees in our school district are having the opportunity to fine-tune their equity lens.
So, speaking of culturally responsive, there are 2 tracks that I'm going to speak to today, and I want to really share the excitement that I have with these courses or these 2 tracks that have started to manifest themselves. So culturally responsiveness is also in leadership and teaching. So in the leadership track, we've had about 330 individuals who registered. We've also had about 102 who have participated in this. So with these tracks, I do refer them as a journey. So reflection is a huge piece of equity. So when we look at this, I have looked at the equity policy in the truest form that we see it. And the first course of the track is called Let's Talk Courageously. So this is really using the courageous conversations about race protocol, having these racial and cultural narratives, having these conversations in an open forum, but also in breakout sessions as well. But this lenses their view on bias. What does that mean? What does it look like? We look at explicit, so part 2 or course 2 is explicit bias, also implicit bias, with a focus of microaggressions. Why? Because they feed off of each other. There's also elements that are tied to these two phenomenons. So we look at those elements as well when it comes to bias and microaggressions. Then we go into the whole trauma piece. Why did I put trauma in here? Trauma is also how we engage and how we respond to individuals based off of our triggers. So I take them through the CDC, the ACEs survey, It's the ACEs survey that I take them through to get them to understand what their triggers are and what their trauma is and how they're going to engage. Now, what this ultimately does is allow them to see themselves in those lenses, but also how this relates to their students. Sometimes as adults, we forget that we used to be students, and our triggers do engage us in how we respond to individuals, and that also speaks to our students as well. Once we go through course 1, 2, and 3, now it's time to start looking at what equity, diversity, and inclusion really looks like once we have that background information. Now that we know what 1, 2, 3, and 4 entails, now we can look at those culturally responsive leadership strategies, and I take them through simulations. These simulations can be culturally based, they could be LGBTQ based, they could be ESC based. Whatever the simulation is, walk them through the process. Again, these simulations can be with students, could be colleagues, it could be staff. Walk them through these simulations so they understand what culturally leadership strategies they should be using in certain situations. Now, the teachers are going to mimic that very same track. The only difference is, since they are more focused with students, the first course is Introduction to Culturally Responsive Teaching. So that kind of gives them an idea of what CRT is, what that actually looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, not just to the teacher, but also to the student. Then they follow the same course. Let's Talk Courageously, Microaggressions with Bias, and then they go through the trauma piece as well. Their last 2 courses is focused on pedagogy. What does culturally responsive teaching pedagogy looks like now that we went through 1 through 4? Once they go through the pedagogy course, now we're going to look at equitable behaviors. What does that actually mean? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Now, the caveat or the good part of this is, not only do we have this, I have also looked at equity teams. So when I started with 2 equity teams. 2 weeks overturned, I have now 20 equity teams in different schools. These equity teams are going to be tiered out into different tracks throughout the years. How is this going to look? I've reached out to teaching and learning, so they are going to do social emotional learning. They're also doing a race-based unpacking through literature. I've also reached out to Safe Schools, who are looking to do a behavioral track on cultural norms and also racial norms and how behaviors are seen through those lenses. I've also reached out to Multicultural, who is also lending that lens to how cultures deal with different norms, whether it's their language or traditions or customs. So Multicultural is going to lend their expertise on that as well. I've also looked at the 4 mandates, and any mandates that we are legally responsible for, that is also going to be within the track for the equity teams. I'm also trying to look at how to build sustainability. So I'm also looking at how to build a train the trainer track so the teacher leaders who are on these equity teams could be able to train in these PDs. So Keisha Starks won't be going to all schools, but we'll have some of those teachers who can do these trainings within these tracks. Now, that is what we have that's going on right now that I'm diligently working on. if any one of you want to sit with me, have a conversation about the equity that we are working on, I am more than happy to sit down and have a conversation with you regarding the equity work that is progressing. Thank you.
Mrs. Whitfield, you have a question?
I do. I wanted to ask Ms. Starks, thank you for that. And I'm very excited to see the work that you're doing. I'm just curious, how do you get teachers or leadership members to attend these classes? Is it a mandate? Is it something that we need to make a mandate? Is it something that, they're just volunteering for? How does it work?
As of right now, they're volunteering. So there's not a mandate for anyone to take these courses.
Energy. You want to speak to the energy? Another part to the answer is not mandatory, but as you've all heard this before, if you build good PD, they'll come to it. And it's been word of mouth. So we've been publicizing or whatever, but teachers talk to teachers, leaders talk to leaders. And it has caught like wildfire to the point where we have a good problem at this point in regard to scheduling to keep it up. It's offered every month. We put the dates in the e-learning system on the last day of every month. So Ms. Starks had a charge to build relationships because she's new to the district, and she's exceeded that expectation because now everyone is saying her name in regard to the work. But the best part about it is, not only have they taken the course, they've told a friend has told a friend, and they are actually taking this back, and it has actually grown beyond what I think it was stated earlier, equity does not live in one place. If we do this right and we build this out in our strategic plan, it lives everywhere. So it's almost like the saying with Chief Kitzerow, we're all security, we're all equity. And the word is getting around that, and the tiering out of the different departments all came because they took the course. And once they took the course, they took it and they went back and did something with it. And that, of course, created out different tracks. So Ms. Starks is being very modest right now in regard to that. But because of what she has offered and the conversations that have taken place in these sessions, they lead to the follow-up session. Can I call you afterwards? Can I really talk about what I want to do at my school? And it has taken on. So it is not mandatory, but even with it not being mandatory, the demand is awesome.
But let me say this as well. I think after the murder of George Floyd, Ms. Starks, I think, was relatively new to the district. And so I actually brought her to executive cabinet to start this courageous conversation. And I think we spent almost half of executive cabinet doing this. And so, again, I had no real expectations other than we needed an opportunity to talk about the situation in front of us. What grew out of that, I found out months later, is that every member of executive cabinet then went back to their own departments and divisions and started requesting Ms. Starks to come do those conversations in their world. So it became kind of organic around sort of me just demanding that they came to executive cabinet, and it just kind of moved from there. But I think now we're at a point now with the board's guidance that we can make this more intentional. This was sort of just responding to the moment at the time that just kind of caught fire.
Dr. Robinson and then Ms. Brill.
Thank you. I might need to split mine up into sections here. So, well, first, thank you for this presentation. I have so much I want to say. God, I am just hopeful. I am hopeful, not happy, but I'm hopeful that maybe, prayerfully, Palm Beach County School District will move down the road that I've been trying to push us down for 20 years, actually plus, right? So let me say this. So the first thing about this equity is owned by everyone thing, yeah, I got it. Just like safety is owned by everybody, but guess what? We have a chief of police, okay? So we need to have a chief officer of equity. Somebody has to own it while we saying it's everybody's job, right? So I'm crystal clear on that. We can debate it if somebody wants. The next thing is, I think it's critically important that we define our goal. So, and I've had this multi-year conversation with people where equity, I say, is equity a noun? I had this conversation with Dr. Ruiz when he was doing the policy, and Mr. Knowles. Is equity a noun or is it a verb, right? Council of Great City Schools last year had a little button that said equity is a verb. Yeah, I don't agree with you, right? Equity is a noun. We need to define what the equitable outcomes are we're trying to get to, right? So along those lines, I think that somewhere relatively early in these board conversations, we need to define the portrait of a graduate, right? So what are the skills and talents that we want our students to have? Not that stuff required by the state, right? But what are the experiences that we want our students to have coming out of high school, for them to be whole people that have, you know, these great expectations and can take advantage of opportunities, right? So I'm gonna tell you one that in conversation with REI alumni last night I came up with, and which is really, people go, huh? But I think that every child should have the experience of participating in a team sport. Because I think that builds something and teaches you how to work with people and how we're interdependent, yada, yada. But what those bullet points are is for the board to discuss. My point is this: if we can clearly define what it is, where we're trying to go, what we want for all of our students, then we can back map and figure out who's got what in terms of the things that get you to that point. It's almost like, you know, I call it an algebraic equation and people's eyes roll in the back of their head, but it's almost like you can create a to-do list, a sequencing of the experiences and things that you need for somebody to reach the point we want them to reach. Am I making sense to y'all? Because, and so I think we need to set our eye on the target, or as I'm now referring to it, the North Star. We need to define it, right? And so until we know what we think the minimum acceptable expectation is for our students coming out, then we cannot figure out what the equity work is, right? So I'm really clear about this equity as a noun, all right? So that's one thing. I appreciate you mentioning the educational debt. I just, you know, I did like an 8-minute board comment thing on the educational debt article many months ago. I know everybody went to sleep while I was talking, but I would encourage you to Google it and read it, because if you look at that, you understand the multi-generational debt that we're dealing with, that we see show up in our data. And until we acknowledge that, until we acknowledge the history, right, that is the foundation for what we are working with, then we're not going to address it. We're just going to be talking equity, just saying the word, right? And so I would encourage that. Okay, I'm just to do a couple more points before I stop talking and wait for my second go around. But let me just say this and be real clear. There's some saying that I don't remember exactly, but it basically says that your budget shows what you believe in, right? And so we have to talk about how our budget reflects our values around equity, right? And one of the things, a very, very low-hanging fruit that I'm gonna throw out now, since Ms. Starks talked about these equity teams, is we could fund those equity teams. We could incentivize people to do a great job. Now, Ms. Starks did work in Broward County and had, I'm a brag on you, because I just thought it was outstanding way to operationalize this work. She had, for her, were they equity coaches? Is that what they were called?
Equity liaisons.
Equity liaisons. So she had a sequence of like classes and deliverables, and if they did those things, then they got this stipend, right? And I just thought that was an outstanding way in a bureaucracy to make a bureaucracy start changing from the inside. Okay, one more thing. You know, I got 25 million things I could say on this. So on page 6, I just want to add this, the scheduling regular listening sessions with key stakeholders. Let me be really clear, who the first people are we need to talk to is the people we're not serving. And all the equity work will tell you that. So we don't need to talk to the usual suspects now, all right? We already got that. We already have our hearing aids attuned to the frequency of their voices. We need to hear from the people that we have not served, right? And I actually have a little idea about how we can start working on those voices, but I won't be clear with that because we had this tendency to go around and do our little thing and listen to the same old suspects. We have to find the way to authentically listen, not just listen, but hear, right? What our young people are telling us, or as the president of the Black Student Union at Suncoast said to the then superintendent a decade ago, yeah, I know that you hear me, but do you feel me? And that's what we need to get to. Because we have got to start understanding how what we do makes our children, how it makes them feel, and how it will push them to disengage, right? And then we don't understand. We just don't understand. So this work around microaggressions, I think is absolutely fantastic. I went through this training about microaggressions, just triggered me all over the place, right? Because, I have triggers for being on the school board, right? But the point is that if we understand how we are participating in microaggressions and macroaggressions, if we understand how when we witness a microaggression, how we are part of the problem if we don't speak to it, like we got to start getting with that, because I can't even tell you half of the stories that my children came home with about how what I now would identify as have experienced microaggressions. So we need to understand why Black people react differently, Latinx people react differently, and so forth. It's because of our experiences, right? Individually and collectively. And I'm going to just close it by saying this. I was in a conversation with the superintendent and some others, and I told them, I just had this little problem where it triggered me because they want to use SurveyMonkey, right? Now, I guess many people don't even understand why that would trigger me. All right? Some people do. All right? So, there was a time gone by where Black folks were referred to as all kinds of different apes, right? So anything with a monkey triggers me. I'm sensitized to that, right? And so, but I have the voice and the agency to express it, right? There's gonna be other people who will be triggered but not express it, and you don't understand why they suddenly withdrew from you. So, okay, I'm gonna be quiet for the moment, but you'll come back to me.
I sure will. Ms. Brill and then Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and mine's going to be a lot shorter because I just wanted to add into Dr. Robinson's comments that I had made a note. I would like us to speak to students. I think it's important that we get the students' voices because they're the ones that are the most impacted by what we are not doing. The other thing was just very simply for the self-study and the article. How soon are you going to get that to us? You're going to email that to us today?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, and just to respond, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Mary Furtakis came up with this idea, but she would like to also include our board student representative in some of these conversations. She's more than happy to book some time. I'll reach out to him and make sure he's available to include him on these conversations and possibly the board retreat. So hopefully that, she's very in tune with that. So wanted to share with that. Thank you.
And just as a follow-up, who's going to be scheduling the time? You're going to schedule
I
it?
will work with the board office, yes.
Okay, well, for me, I don't schedule through the board office.
Okay.
So just make a note that because my schedule's crazy, so,
No worries.
as soon as I get that, I'll reach out to you and we can set a date.
Thank you, Ms. Brill.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews, then Mrs. McQuinn.
Yes, thank you. And this is such great work. But as I look at this work and I think back over the years that I've been in Palm Beach County School District, as well as sitting on this board, we really have to mean what we say this time and get the work done. I mean, I've been through a lot of trainings, and I've seen the teachers go through the trainings, and it's forgotten. And it starts out with a real big bang that we're going to do all these great things, and then it just disappears. So hopefully this initiative that we're beginning this time will be meaningful, because we will actually have a deep dive to where we need to be so that we can make it work. So one of the things as I looked at, especially the students, I was just talking to Diana Fetterman about the LGBTQ plus students that we have in our district. I heard you mention that a few minutes ago. But we've got all kinds of students in different groups within our district. When I looked at the short-term calendar for the board, I almost see us, and I know we have our district diversity committee, and we all have one person representing us, but that's a big umbrella. We've got to dig deep into these communities. We've got all kinds of groups of people in our communities where we can have a multi-level of conversation if we're going to dig deep and truly talk about it. We were just talking about the cheerleaders last week, okay? We know what that is. That's been that way. And we've been looking at it, and we don't really do anything about it. But I'm talking about all these children that truly want to be in advanced placement classes or want to participate in the band and in sports that don't get a chance to do it. So when I think about this, I love it that we're going to get this training, the teachers are going to get this training, but we've got to get some subcomponents that we're going to dig deep in these neighborhoods where the children are coming from. Get some of the parents involved in this, you know, and I know you got the big heavyweight committees, and I love our student council representative, but I'm looking at the Maya group that we have right here in Lake Worth. Nobody really spends that much time. I was happy to see something on the board where we're doing something with Highland, but that's a group of people that we haven't even looked at. So when we start digging deep with the people, when we're talking about equitableness and reaching out to those who are least served, there's a whole lot of different groups that may be represented on our diversity committee, but we got to go to the neighborhoods and go out and find them and make a calendar to give this information of this training that we're giving to all of us, which work for the school district, and all the people that connect with us and our partners and business people and so on. We've got to go deep down into the field, into the weeds where they are, so that we can find out what the needs are. I love this. I've just seen it before, and I'm just hoping that with the consultant that's going to come back and retrain us again, because we've been here before, that we're going to really make a difference and talk about how deep we need to go. And we all know our districts really well. We know many of the people in our districts. We know where the children come from and where their parents are and what they need. I'm hoping that the board will learn so that we can help the district dig deep. You know, the schools know a lot, but many times they're not out into the neighborhoods the way they should be out into the neighborhoods, delving deep into these pieces that we're talking about. So as we begin to build a plan, I love the first steps here, but I'd love to see a lot of different calendars of all the different groups that we've identified that's been left behind for years and years and years here in Palm Beach County, and how we're going to put them on this plate with the school board, with the administration, the teachers, and everybody else, and how we're going to work this through. It's a lot of work if you truly mean what you say. And I'm willing to do my part to kind of take it to a different level this time. And I commend you all for what you're doing with this, so that we can do what we need to take care of our children so that they can all be successful, and our communities. Thank you.
Mrs. McQuinn?
Actually, Mrs. Andrews' comments lead into what I wanted to say, but don't let me finish my comments without going back to the last bullet on page 4, please. Whoever's doing this, I would love, whoever's putting these groups together that we're going to listen to, we must listen to the students. And I would like to see, to come back to us, how that's going to happen. Students aren't going to talk to board members. They're not going to talk to district people. They will talk to people they trust, which is usually a teacher. So I know you're building teacher leadership teams. Kids are going to more likely talk to a teacher that they trust who's had this training. And even if it is, I can't remember what we called it, it'll come back to me. But if you'll have two teachers together who can create a nice, friendly environment for kids to talk, that's really what we have to do. And you can identify those. You can go to when we're talking different races. You're not necessarily in a particular neighborhood. You can be at Jupiter High School, but you have kids coming from other neighborhoods who are coming because they want a particular program or they want a particular environment. So I would just like for us to look at all students where we know that we have inequities. Thank you. It's the last bullet. I really love this. It says we have a sense of urgency to address inequities. I think we mean inequities that exist within our system. The part to ensure ideal educational outcomes for all students, regardless of background. If we can do that, we can change the world. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Certainly.
I do have a response for the student voice. So I have added that piece into the equity teams. So the equity teams have been charged to bring on a student panel of some sort, almost like a student equity team with this. And also to the parent and communities, I am entertaining tiering out these courses for communities and parents as well.
Mrs. McQuinn, go ahead.
Thank you. And just to follow up to that, we won't necessarily find these kids who are our leaders. I see you nodding, so I don't have to say any more. Thanks.
Yes, they are being addressed in that with the equity teams to be very fair in this student council panel piece with that. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Dr. Robinson, you're on again.
Thank you. I won't say everything. So let me just say, I would like to hear from everyone. But if we're going to talk about equity, we have to reach those who we are not serving, right? Not the student government kid, right? So I just need to make that clear. And we all know that there are young people, there's old people too, but right now we're talking about young people who are not engaging in teacher-pleasing behavior, but they are opinion leaders, right, on campus. That's what we need to hear from as a start, right? We also need to go to the alternative ed schools because we know that we have failed them, right? And so, you know, a few years ago, I made a few trips and sat with young people at Turning Points and asked them, tell me what I'm supposed to do. What do I need to do to change this so that your younger siblings don't end up at Turning Points, right? Almost everyone said in one way or another, like, give me a teacher who cares about me, right? I mean, almost everyone said it in different ways, right? They also talked about programs, engaging in programs that they were interested in, but it was just amazing to me and actually affirming the importance of teachers. And so the work that you're doing, the culturally responsive teaching work, I think is terribly, terribly important. I don't want to confuse that with equity though, right? And so again, I'm going to say, point to the North Star. So we had this conversation. Is it outcome or what's the out? Okay, so I'm willing to work with your outcomes in here, but I want to define North Star, right? Because I just don't understand how we work with any sense of purpose and intentionality if we don't know where we're trying to go, right? And so I think that it has to be early on in the board's calendar. I would also encourage us to look at, there were some student surveys that were done, actually will be presented November 30th as part of Superintendent's Advisory Committee for Black Student Excellence student surveys. And you could talk to them about how they got this information from the students, but I think it could be replicated. And also in the summer, the African American Summer Institute, there was a student panel that talked about, again, circling back to recent conversations about how learning their history engaged them, and that all students needed it. So I just want to also just outline, share this. So, I've talked about the Council of Great City Schools Conference. It's always awesome. This year, it was focused on race and equity, and 2 on COVID. So, but before I talk about this equity by design, I want to know, are we leading with race?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I only see one head nodding. So I just need to be clear, because everybody that's doing equity work across the country leads with race. I need to know if Palm Beach County is, or are we going to do that everybody thing, right? Because the primary sin in this country is based on race. And everybody else's oppression is part of that. But are we leading with race?
I think once the board does the self-study, that self-study speaks to that reality.
Okay.
And so I think we can definitely, and then when we have our retreat, I think that is the beginning of it. But
Okay.
the information that the team provided to the board goes straight to the heart of what you're saying.
Thank you. Now, let me say this. And those links in the PowerPoint, the webinar that was all audio, and then the 10 steps the board can take for racial equity, were outstanding. Like, keep that stuff coming. It gives me hope. But I just want to share this one thing, and then I think I'm going to try to be quiet on. There was one of the Council of Great City Schools breakout sessions that was called Funding Equity, I think is what it was called, the cost of equity. And so these were people talking about their budget processes. Once they focused on equity, then how did they approach the budget differently, right? And so, and part of it, I think it might have been Austin. One of them talked specifically about their community engagement around the budget process, right? Which is something that I hope we will do. And it also reminds me of the people's budget process that took place in Pinellas County a few years ago. It wasn't the school board, I think it was the county's budget, but they actively engaged community in the hard times when they knew that they were going to have to make some difficult choices. And it served to, and in both of these examples, served to educate the community, have the community understand the difficult choices that in this case the school board would be dealing with, and then help them determine the priorities, right? So I just think that's a process we should look at. So the last thing I want to say is, so one of these school districts in this particular training had this, I think it was Austin. They specifically talked about this equity by design training. And so they had 8 steps. First was identify the underserved groups using disaggregated data, right? And so, that's why I decided, one of the reasons I decided to start showing the data. 2, to listen to the voice of the adversely affected, right? 3, conduct root cause analysis with communities. 4, do an environmental scan and asset mapping with communities. 5, research promising practices and industry leaders. 6, establish robust, realistic goals over time for all student groups. 7, adapt or develop research-based tactics and strategies with the underserved communities. And 8, draft strategic implementation plan and evaluation. So I know we are anxious to do a new strategic plan. I just want to do it right. And I think if we're really going to have equity as, embedded in it, that maybe we do it and then we just accept the fact that we need to revise it in 18 months or something once we've done more study around equity and what we can do in Palm Beach County School District to really focus on getting all of our young people to that North Star. Thank you.
Ms. Whitfield and Mrs. Andrews.
I just have a process question. Thank you. I wanted to understand a little bit about that day that we're going to be working on this. I saw mission and vision we're going to work on. Is that going to be a part of a larger strategic planning process that takes place later, or are we going to try to tackle some strategic planning in the same day, or is it, when does that work? How does that happen?
I think for the board retreat, we're really trying to come to a working definition of equity, just because I can't remember if it's the mission or vision, but the word equity is in there. And so, Ms. Fertakis, started before we even got the funding, and she looked at our equity policy as well and also had some suggestions on, well, maybe if you come to a definition, you revise your policy and put it in there as well, so that, you make that loud, clear statement about where you stand as a board. And so I think Ms. Fertakis will be able to share some insight in that sense. I think the board retreat can, float a little bit to the strategic plan if we need it to, but the ultimate goal is really to have a strong foundation so that staff can really take that and then start building out the strategic planning process and making sure that as we put drafts together, we take that definition into account, or any changes to the mission vision, to make sure that those align with whatever strategic plan comes forward. I know Dr. Fenoy may have.
Yeah, and also in that particular meeting, we will be onboarding our new board member as well. That will be part of that process as well.
And I think when it comes to the budget, that's sort of something that's been kind of weighing on me in this process too, is that if we really do want to prioritize these changes that we're going to make, or if we want to prioritize anything, we have to tie it to the budget. So how would the timing work on that? When do we have an opportunity to say, these are our goals strategically? Maybe it's, working on third grade reading and, focusing on equity as an office instead of, department or something like that. How do we say as a board that this is a bigger priority to us than something else? Like, when is that moment?
So I know Ms. Millen talked about this a little bit, but we're really using the desired outcomes in the equity policy to be the organizational unit for these board workshops or sessions or whatever we want to call them, around our current state, like where are we as it relates to these outcomes. What are some innovative or best practices related to that desired outcome? So that's what we'll bring in, some of these districts that we heard from the Council of Great City Schools, community partners, or schools that may be doing some good things in relation to that desired outcome. And then the nitty-gritty, what will it take? And part of that conversation, I think, is going to be around the dollars and cents. So when I hear Dr. Fenoy say that no one owns this per se, it's everyone, I know that we've approached this work as, we don't want this to be siloed, like, oh, the desired outcome around recruiting and retaining teachers, that only belongs to HR. Well, no, it really is an entire system-wide effort to get that diversity here. So we really want to be mindful in using that equity policy as our organizational unit for those workshops, so that, we've already had folks weigh in and say, this is what we think it will take. I definitely hear Dr. Robinson say, but does that lead to the portrait of a graduate that we actually want? And I think, again, this is very complex work. There will absolutely be hard decisions that the school board, district staff, the superintendent will need to make, if that's the line in the sand that y'all choose to draw. But I think our job as district staff is to really put these workshops together so that you can see current state, best practices, innovative, and then, definitely working with Mr. Burke and his team to say, what's the dollars and cents? What will it take? Because you're absolutely right. Some things we may need to, put to the side so that we can attend to these things in year 1 or year 2 or by year 5. And so if the board decides, we may need some more time to develop the strategic plan, or we know that in 18 months we'll have to revisit that, I think that flexibility is something, again, that Ms. Fertakis will talk to, because it's not a one and done, right? It's a long-term thing. Things are changing. We know, we want to accelerate our kids due to COVID and other factors. Like, we had that educational debt even before COVID. So I think we can really use this as an opportunity, and the timing with the strategic plan will allow us just to organize it better, because to Ms. Andrews' point, this isn't the first time. But I think, the three of us absolutely are committed to this work, and are really seeking the board's direction here, and I think we're hearing a lot of good things, just to help us make sure that we can come back to you later this month or in early December, so y'all can see the schedule of board workshops and make sure that that makes sense. Make sure that we're drawing on your collective expertise and of district staff as well to engage the right folks in this work. And, while we can't promise that, in the beginning we'll get all the folks we're not serving, we will absolutely be out there shaking those bushes for as long as it takes, but we've got to start somewhere. And I think, again, that schedule of workshops will help y'all decide and hopefully see, what will it take financially as well as just, culturally or just decision-making and things like that.
I think it's important too. I mean, Mr. Burke and his team will be doing more budget workshops than we have in the past. I think, if I reflect on other board meetings, this is moving beyond aspirational goals right now. However, we still don't know what the mid-year adjustment to our budget is going to look like. And so I think that's why we have to look at this as a multi-year. This is not like something we're going to do this year. We got to plan this out over years because we are dealing with realities of the economy. And so I think as we keep pushing forward, those are the critical conversations, Ms. Whitfield and others, that we're going to have because just like with our principals right now, who we've asked them to change their entire world in the matter of the last 10 months. Well, it's stressful. It is very hard. And so here's the question for us moving forward. So we know that this is a priority for the board, and we're going to put this in our strategic plan. But at some point, based on finances and because this is our new focus, we have to ask ourselves what comes off the plate. And that's the other part of the hard conversation. And again, so we're having those conversations internally as a team, but we have to bring the board up to speed on what comes off the plate as we move forward with these new initiatives, especially as it relates to our budget constraints.
Mrs. Andrews?
And thank you, and this is probably repeating what some of you have already said, but when you look around the country, you've got school districts who have really been meaningful with this, and it has taken years for them to get to where they are now. But it started with the leadership of the board and the superintendent to say this is a commitment that we are going to do and we're going to make it happen. Because I'm looking at some of these school districts each time I work with the Council of Great City Schools. So we have to be meaningful. Again, I think we've been trying, but we have really not been committed to really being fulfilled, to do what has to be done. And we're looking at the United States of America. People are questioning now why. From education, from economics, from all of these different arenas, equity and access for everybody, it's being talked about, and people want something to happen. I certainly want something to happen as a school board member. And I'm looking at the Florida School Boards Association. They have stepped up. Sarasota County just brought a consultant in last year, and they've actually put together something. So I would like for you to reach out to Sarasota County and what they did. Because I'm looking at it as I work with the Florida School Board Association Equity Committee and working with them. So we've got to really be meaningful. And this work, surely we've got to have the budget money, but it's not going to happen all on the 8 to 4:30 job line, okay? We've got to be meaningful. This is what I'm talking about. I was sitting with the Boys and Girls Club just recently in the evening when our children, many of our children, once they leave us during the day, they have to go somewhere until their parents get off from work to get taken care of, to get food, to get something to eat, to be supervised. Children are talking about what happens to them within the school district of Palm Beach County during the day. And until you find those modes where you can get the truth, because they will tell you the truth. They may not tell you the truth within a classroom setting or within a school setting, but they may tell you that within their neighborhood or in a church or in a Boys and Girls Club or in a group of what truly has happened to them when they go to school every day. So if we really want to change our way of doing things so that we can be equitable for all our children, we've got to find a way to get their voices heard, get their parents' voices heard. And it may not be at a PTA meeting or PTO meeting. You got to find those places where people will be willing to talk to you and tell you the truth, including the students. And so, I mean, when we talk about a budget and we talk about a long-term, this is what I'm looking for. I'm willing to give the long-term time and going out to places to find out what we need to do. We kind of know that. We know the children that are being left behind. but their parents need to be able to tell us what they see for their children. They have the same desires and outcomes that every other parent has. And so we've got to give them the time. This is a wonderful start, and we're beginning, but some of the roadmap has already been done by progressive school districts. So, I mean, you can look and find a map where you don't have to really recreate the wheel, but we really want to look at ourselves and how we do it. And it's not a rush thing. It's going to take the time to do it. So I'm happy that we have the consultant, that as a board, we're taking the lead with the superintendent and the rest of the team here in Palm Beach County, the principals and schools and everybody. But we need to know it's truly about our children and making sure that they can get the best so that they can be successful. So remember, it's not a 9 to 5 or 8 to 4:30 or 8 to 3 kind of thing and you go home. You got to get to know who the children are, who the stakeholders are as their parents and others, and truly be meaningful in making a difference in their life, academically, socially, emotionally, to the next levels. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Millen and team, for a great presentation. We appreciate your assistance with this. Mr. Superintendent, you want to move on to the next board workshop?